The storm that never ends. The first thunderclap came without warning, so violent that it shook the deck beneath Aaron's feet. He clutched the railing as the sky went black above, almost like a thick veil thrown over the ship. It was supposed to be a simple, relaxing cruise, just a week to unwind and escape the stress of work. But as the wind whipped across the deck, biting and cold, he quickly realized this was no ordinary storm. Passengers around him screamed as the rain began to pour, cold and heavy, pounding against the ship like angry fists. Crew members ushered everyone inside, their voices drowned out by the howling wind. Aaron followed the crowd to the main lounge, his heart pounding with a sense of urgency he couldn't shake. Hours passed as the storm raged on, but instead of easing, it grew stronger. The captain, a man with decades of experience at sea, reassured them that the storm would soon pass. But his voice wavered, and Aaron didn't miss the look of fear that flashed across his face as night fell. The ship's lights flickered, casting long shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. Every so often, a deep rumbling sound echoed from somewhere below deck, as if the ocean itself was growling. Aaron's pulse quickened with each ominous sound. Sleep seemed impossible with the relentless roar of thunder and the strange creaks that seemed to come from within the ship itself. The first sign that something was deeply wrong came the next day. Aaron glanced at his watch, 9 a.m., but outside the windows, the world was still pitch black. He approached a nearby window, pressing his face to the glass. The rain pelted down harder than ever, and beyond the ship there was nothing but endless, inky darkness. The storm should have subsided by now, Aaron thought. His gut twisted as he stared into the black void beyond. The hours dragged on, and a sense of dread settled over the passengers. The ship's crew seemed at a loss, their confident smiles replaced with worried glances and hushed conversations. Whispers spread through the crowd about how the storm had been going on for over 24 hours now. An impossibility at sea. Aaron tried to keep calm, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. It was as if eyes lurked in every shadow, waiting, biding their time. At dinner, the lights overhead flickered once more, casting the dining hall into a dim half-light. Aaron sat with a group of passengers who, like him, were eager for answers. Beside him was Lee, a young woman traveling alone, her hands clasped tightly together as she stared at her untouched plate. "Has anyone tried talking to the captain again?" Aaron asked, breaking the silence. A man across from him shook his head. "They're saying he's not feeling well." "Strange, don't you think?" Leah glanced up, her eyes wide. I've heard footsteps outside my cabin. In the middle of the night, I thought it was just the crew. But Aaron leaned in. But what? They weren't normal footsteps. They were heavy, almost dragging. I opened my door, but the hallway was empty. A cold shiver ran down Aaron's spine. He wanted to dismiss her words as paranoia, a trick of the mind in such unsettling circumstances. But he'd felt it too, the weight of something unnatural pressing in on them. That night, Aaron couldn't sleep. Every sound felt amplified. The groaning of the ship, the distant echo of thunder. And somewhere in the darkness, the faint sound of footsteps. At around midnight, he heard it, something scratching at his door. He froze, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would give him away. The scratching grew louder, more insistent, as if whatever was on the other side was desperate to get in. He held his breath, waiting for it to stop, but it only grew more frantic. Summoning his courage, he slowly reached for the door handle. Turning it just a crack, there was nothing. The empty hallway stretched before him, silent and still. But when he glanced down, his blood ran cold. A trail of wet footprints led away from his door, disappearing into the shadows at the end of the hall. The next day, he sought out Leah, finding her near the lounge, staring vacantly out a window. She turned to him, eyes wide and haunted. "It happened to you, too, didn't it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm's relentless pounding. Aaron nodded, his hands clenching into fists. "This storm, it's not natural. And I think we're not alone here." As if on cue, the lights above them flickered, casting the room into a disorienting strobe. Shadows seemed to dart across the walls, vanishing as soon as the lights stabilized. They soon realized they were not the only ones experiencing the strange phenomena. More passengers reported hearing whispers in their cabins, of seeing figures out of the corner of their eyes. But when they turned to look, there was nothing but shadows and empty hallways. The days blurred together. Time seemed to lose all meaning as they drifted through the endless storm, surrounded by darkness so thick it felt like a physical weight pressing down on them. Panic took hold as food and water supplies dwindled. Some passengers became listless, resigned to their fate, while others frantically searched for any means of escape. But there was nowhere to go. The ship was their only refuge. And yet, it felt more like a prison. One night, as Aaron lay in his bunk, he heard it again. The footsteps, slow, deliberate, dragging along the floor outside his cabin. This time, he knew he had to see it for himself. He slipped out of his cabin, pressing his back against the wall, moving as silently as he could. The hallway was drenched in darkness, illuminated only by the dim emergency lights flickering above. At the far end of the hall, he saw it a figure, standing motionless, half hidden in shadow. Its face was obscured, but Aaron could feel its gaze boring into him, cold and unfeeling. His breath hitched as the figure slowly lifted an arm, pointing directly at him. He stumbled backward, nearly tripping over his own feet. The figure advanced, its steps slow and methodical, never breaking eye contact. As it drew closer, he could make out the faint features, a gaunt face, hollow eyes, a mouth twisted in a silent scream. Aaron turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't stop until he reached the main deck, gasping for breath as the rain lashed against his face. The storm showed no signs of letting up. It was as if the ship was trapped in a perpetual night, doomed to drift forever in darkness. In the following days, passengers began to disappear. One by one, cabins were found empty, belongings left behind as if their owners had simply vanished. Aaron tried to rally the remaining passengers to find some way to escape, but each day their numbers dwindled, the ship feeling emptier, more desolate. He and Leah became each other's last allies, both determined to find answers, to escape before they too were swallowed by the storm. They scoured the ship, venturing into areas marked off limits, uncovering fragments of the ship's history, a journal from a past passenger, letters recounting similar tales of endless storms and restless spirits. Finally, they found a hidden compartment deep within the lower decks. Inside, they discovered a faded plaque with a chilling inscription. in memory of the souls lost at sea who will forever wander these waters, realization dawned, chilling them to the core. The ship was cursed, doomed to sail the storm-laden seas, trapping the souls of those who died aboard. And now, it had claimed them too. Just as despair set in, they heard footsteps echoing down the corridor. They turned to see a familiar face, the captain, his eyes empty, his expression hollow. But he was no longer the man they'd met at the start of the journey. He was a shell, a spirit, a warning. This ship, there is no escape, he intoned, his voice barely a whisper, as if spoken from another realm. Aaron and Leah backed away, their hearts sinking. They were part of the ship's curse now, destined to wander the endless storm alongside the lost souls. As they drifted back to the upper deck, Aaron cast one last, hopeful glance into the darkness, praying for a glimpse of daylight. But all he saw was the unending night, the black waves stretching into eternity. For more terrifying tales that will chill you to the bone, make sure to click the link and dive into another story. But be warned, you might not come back the same.